They were called the Devil Twins in the richest house on the block. Every nanny quit. Every therapist gave up. Until one woman walked in, not with a degree in child psychology, but with something far more powerful: patience, pain, and love. They laughed when they heard she was just a maid. But in less than 6 months, she didn't just tame the twins, she healed them. And the millionaire, too. She did what no one else could. Hey everyone, welcome back. Or if it's your first time, welcome to the channel where real stories hit harder than fiction. Today's story, it's one you have to hear to believe. No nanny lasted with the millionaire's twins until a black maid did the impossible. It's a story of defiance, compassion, and breakthrough, of how one woman, written off by everyone, stepped into a broken family and changed them forever. Oh, before we dive into this beautiful story of resilience and redemption, tap that like button to support meaningful stories. Subscribe so you never miss an upload. Hit the notification bell so you're first in line for our next video. And share this with anyone who believes love is the greatest power of all. Ready? Let's discover what really happened when the millionaire met the maid who wouldn't back down. What the hell do you think you're doing in my bed? Edward Hawthorne's voice shattered the stillness like a hammer. Against glass, he stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, his tall frame rigid with rage, disbelief carved into every hard line of his face. Rainwater dripped from his coat, but he didn't seem to notice. All his attention was locked on the woman in his bed, Maya Williams. She shot up from the mattress, heart pounding, eyes wide, not with guilt but with shock. The twin boys, Ethan and Eli, lay curled on either side of her, finally asleep, their faces soft, breathing deep. The teddy bear in Ethan's arms rose and fell in rhythm with his chest. "I can explain," Maya said quietly, trying not to wake the boys. Her hands lifted slightly, calm, open. They were scared. Eli started crying. Ethan got a nosebleed. Edward didn't let her finish. His palm came down fast, a sharp crack echoing off the walls as it struck her cheek. Maya staggered back, gasping, one hand flying to her face. She didn't cry out, didn't even speak. Her eyes just locked on his, stunned more by the blow than the fury. "I don't care what excuse you have," Edward growled. "You're fired. Get out of my house now." She stood still for a moment, hand pressed to her cheek, trying to steady her breath. Her voice, when it came, was low, almost a whisper. "They begged me not to leave them. I stayed because they were finally calm, finally safe. I said, get out." Maya glanced down at the boys, still sleeping so deeply, so peacefully, as if the shadows that haunted them had finally lifted. She leaned over gently, kissed the top of Eli's head, then Ethan's. No words, no fanfare. And then she stepped away from the bed, shoes in hand, and walked past Edward without another word. He didn't stop her. He didn't apologize. Downstairs, Mrs. Keller turned as Maya descended the stairs. The red mark on her cheek spoke volumes. The older woman's eyes widened in shock. Maya said nothing. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle. Maya stepped into the gray afternoon, pulled her coat tighter, and began walking toward the gate. Back upstairs, Edward stood in the master bedroom, still breathing hard. He looked at the bed, again jaw tight, and then something registered. The quiet. He moved closer. Ethan's brow was smooth. No tossing, no whispering, no cold sweat. Eli's thumb was in his mouth, but his other hand was resting on the blanket, still relaxed. They were asleep, not drugged, not exhausted by crying, just asleep. His throat tightened. 14 nannies, therapists, doctors, hours of screaming, fits, and anxiety. And yet Maya, the soft-spoken stranger, had managed what none of them had, and he'd struck her. He sat down on the edge of the bed, head in his hands. Shame bled into his chest like ink and water. On the nightstand, a note lay, folded once. He opened it. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away. The ones who will." It wasn't signed. He read it twice, then again. His reflection in the nearby mirror looked back at him. A man hardened by grief, drowning in control, choking on silence. Down the hall, Mrs. Keller stood watching. "Sir," she said softly. She didn't touch a thing in here. Only brought them in when the little one had a nosebleed. He didn't respond. She stayed because they asked. That's all. They didn't ask for me. They didn't ask for anyone else. Just her. Edward looked up slowly, eyes dark with something more than anger now, something closer to regret. Outside, the gate creaked, closed, and for the first time in months, the Hawthorne house was silent, not with grief or rage, but something else. Peace, the kind Maya had left behind. The house was too quiet, not the comforting kind, like the hush of snowfall or the soft turning of pages in an old book. This was the kind that felt wrong, hollow, and unfinished, like a question left unanswered. Edward Hawthorne sat alone in his study, glass of scotch untouched beside him. The note Mia had left resting on the desk like a judgment. If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will. He'd read it 7 times. Outside, dusk spread over the estate like a heavy quilt, and the wind pressed softly against the windows. Inside, the twins still slept, oblivious of the storm they just slept through, oblivious of the fact that the one person they'd allowed into their fragile world was gone. Edward leaned back in his leather chair and rubbed his temples. His hand stung faintly, the ghost of the slap he delivered still etched into his skin. He hadn't planned it. It wasn't who he believed he was. And yet it had happened, a moment of misjudged fury born from grief and 1,000 quiet failures. He had hit a woman, and not just any woman. He stood suddenly and made his way upstairs. The hallway outside the boys' bedroom smelled faintly of lavender and warm cotton. A small wooden stool sat against the wall. Maya's sketchbook was on top, closed neatly, as if she'd left it there on purpose. He picked it up. Inside were simple drawings, rough, untrained, but full of heart. 2 boys, holding hands beneath a tree, a tall house with too many windows, a figure sitting between the boys, arms stretched. Out like wings, a short caption beneath. The one who stays. He exhaled slowly. In the nursery, Eli stirred. Edward peeked inside. The boy rolled over but didn't wake. No nightmares, no tears. He closed the door softly. Downstairs, Mrs. Keller was folding napkins when Edward entered the kitchen. She looked up and froze. Something in his expression told her to put the linen aside. "She's gone," he said simply. "I know," she replied. "I made a mistake," he said almost to himself. Mrs. Keller raised her eyebrows, but her voice stayed neutral. "You don't say." "She was in my bed. She was in your room," Keller corrected, "because the boys wouldn't sleep anywhere else." "You weren't here." "I was. I heard them cry, beg for her." She calmed him. He pressed his lips together. I know what you thought," she said gently, "but you weren't thinking." Silence stretched between them. He looked at the chair where Maya had sat during lunch only yesterday. It felt like weeks ago. "I need to find her," he said. Mrs. Keller didn't argue. "Start with the return address on her letter. Georgia." He nodded, already heading toward the hall. Across town, Maya sat, alone on a bench outside the train station. Her cheeks still throbbed beneath the cold. She hadn't cried. Not when he yelled, not when he hit her. Not even when she walked past the front gates with nothing but her bag and the ache of unfinished work in her chest. But now with her coat wrapped tight and her fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of vending machine coffee, tears finally welled. She wiped them quickly, not because she was ashamed, but because crying in public was a habit she'd spent years unlearning. A woman nearby watched her for a moment, then offered a tissue without a word. Maya smiled in thanks and looked up at the night sky. It was funny in a cruel way. She had survived worse than a slap. She'd endured being abandoned by a foster family at age 11, losing her own son to illness, being told over and over that she was too soft to handle hard cases. But that house, Those boys, they had reached something inside her she hadn't touched in years. What do you think of Maya? If you believe she's someone truly special, give her a like to show your support. And don't forget to share where you're watching this video from. Who knows? Someone right near you might be watching it. 2. The train pulled in with a long sigh of brakes and metal. She stood slowly, not sure she'd board. Her ticket was in her coat pocket. Destination, Savannah. But her heart was still upstairs in a white house in Greenwich, where 2 boys were finally learning to sleep. She sat back down. The next morning, Edward stood in his son's room with a tray of breakfast scrambled eggs, toast with strawberry, jam, a small bowl of cut fruit. He hadn't done this before, not once since. Their mother died. Eli sat up groggy. Where's Miss Maya? Edward hesitated. Ethan sat up, too. Is she gone? Edward nodded. She had to leave. Why? Ellie's voice cracked. She didn't do anything bad, Ethan said, eyes narrowing. She helped us. You saw we were good. Edward knelt beside the bed, placing the tray on the nightstand. It wasn't your fault. It was mine. Eli looked at him hard. Did you yell at her? Edward didn't lie. Yes. Did you hit her? Ethan's voice was low. Edward's throat tightened. He nodded once. Both boys turned away. He stayed there, kneeling on the carpet for a long time. I'll fix it, he said. Finally, I'll bring her back. They didn't respond, but they heard him. Later that day, Mia boarded a local bus, not a train, and headed to the nearby shelter where she used to volunteer. She needed space, perspective, somewhere to remember that the world was bigger than one house, even one that held her heart. She taught a writing class that afternoon to a group of teen girls, many of them runaways. She told them stories not about Edward or his children, but about choosing to stay when others walk away, about knowing your worth, even when others don't. When she left the shelter, there was a note stuck in the spokes of her bike. It wasn't from Edward, but it said, they asked for you, both of them. Maya looked up at the sky, now strewn with orange, and this time she smiled. Edward Hawthorne didn't knock. He stepped into the old community center just as the sun was beginning its descent behind the trees, casting long golden shadows across the gymnasium floor. The sound of his polished shoes on linoleum was out of place here like a cello in a punk rock band, but he didn't flinch. He scanned the room, spotting Maya at the far end, crouched beside a whiteboard, erasing crooked letters from a lesson. Around her, teenage girls gathered in a loose circle, laughing, joking. Their notebooks sprawled on the floor. Maya laughed with them, her voice lighter than he remembered, not free of pain, but unburdened for a moment. He didn't realize how tightly he'd been holding his breath until she looked up and saw him. The laughter died, not because anyone told it to, but because something in Maya's posture shifted like a curtain drawn mid-performance. She stood. He walked forward, his hands empty. No briefcase, no apology letter, just the weight of what he had done. I need to talk to you, he said. The girls looked at him wearily, one of them stepping slightly in front of Maya. It's okay, Mia said gently, and the girl relaxed. Edward glanced at the whiteboard. A single sentence had been written across the top. Your voice has value, even when it shakes. He turned to Maya. May I? She nodded, leading him outside, to the bench by the bus stop. The same one she'd sat on the day before, coffee in hand, tears hidden in the corners of her eyes. I was wrong, he said immediately. I judged you. I reacted without listening, and I put my hands on you. That's something I will regret for the rest of my life. Maya said nothing. I saw you in my space, in my bed, he continued, and I let fear speak louder than truth. That wasn't just unfair. It was cruel. You didn't believe me, she said. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. Even after your sons trusted me. I know, he said. She looked away. You don't get to walk back into my life because you finally realized I was telling the truth. I'm not here to clear my name, he said. I'm here because they asked for you, not a nanny. You. Maya's eyes softened. How are they? Quiet, they admitted. Too quiet. She nodded slowly. That's not peace. That's a wound closing over without healing. He looked down, hands clasped between his knees. I want to fix this. You can't fix it, she said. But you can start with acknowledging that what your sons need isn't control, it's connection. He exhaled. Come back. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, if I say yes, will I still be staff? He hesitated. Number you'll have whatever. Title you want. Advisor, mentor, partner. She raised an eyebrow. Partner. In their care, he clarified, though the word lingered heavier than he intended. Maya considered it. Fine, she said, but I have conditions. Of course, first, no cameras in the children's rooms. He blinked. There are none. There were, she said. Last month, one nanny told me. He frowned. They were meant for safety. They teach the kids that privacy isn't theirs to keep. He nodded once. Second, she continued, they eat dinner at the table. With you, no phones, no business. He hesitated, but nodded. Again. Third, she said, we rewrite the house rules together with them. He stared at her. They're 5, he said. They're people, she replied. He cracked the smallest smile. Anything else? She took a deep breath. Yes, the next time you raise your hand to someone who doesn't deserve it, anyone, I'm gone and I won't come back. His expression fell. Understood? She stood. I'll see them in the morning. He stood too. Do you want to ride? She shook her head. I'll take the bus. I still have to finish up here. He nodded. Maya, thank you. She paused. Don't thank me yet. We're starting over, Mr. Hawthorne. And this time, I'm not walking on eggshells. She turned and walked back into the building. The whiteboard waiting for her. Return. Edward stood at the curb, watching her go. That night, he cleared the dinner table himself. He called his sons downstairs. He sat between them with a bowl of spaghetti and awkwardly tried to tell a bedtime story, getting the names wrong, the voices too stiff. They laughed at him, not unkindly, just honestly. And upstairs in their freshly made beds, Ethan whispered to Eli, she's coming back. How do you know? Eli asked. Because she said goodbye, Ethan replied, pulling the blanket over his head. Nobody else ever does. On the morning, Maya returned to the Hawthorne estate. The sky was a soft wash of peach and slate blue. Birds fluttered along the treetops, and the manicured lawn glistened with dew. She stood at the iron gates a moment before. They opened, gripping the straps of her worn canvas bag like armor. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The butler, Harold, greeted her with a stunned blink, then stepped aside. With a slight bow, Miss Williams, he said with something close to reverence. Welcome back. Thank you, Maya replied, walking past the polished marble foyer, the towering chandelier, the silence that once felt stifling. She could hear footsteps upstairs, small, quick, and uncoordinated, then a shout. She's here. Eli rounded the staircase first, arms flung open, grinning from ear to ear. Ethan followed, behind slower, but eyes bright, clutching a sketchbook. Maya knelt down just in time to catch Eli in her arms. Well, hello, she said, laughing softly into his curls. We made a welcome back. Sign, Ethan mumbled, thrusting the sketchbook at her. On the first page was a wobbly drawing of her, the 2 boys, and a house with a big heart over it. The caption read, You stayed even when you left. Ma's throat tightened. That's beautiful, honey. Thank you. Footsteps approached behind them. Edward stood at the base of the stairs in a gray sweater, and jeans a far cry from his usual starched suits. He looked like someone trying, not someone pretending. Breakfast is ready, he said. Maya stood, smoothing her blouse. Good. because we have rules to rewrite. In the kitchen, the four of them gathered around the table. No phones, no staff, just a bowl of scrambled eggs, toast, with honey and fresh orange juice. So Maya began, pulling out a notebook. We're going to talk about what it means to live here together. What's fair? What's safe? And what makes this house feel like a home? Ethan raised a hand. Can we have music during bath time? Maya nodded. Reasonable? Eli added. And no broccoli unless it's disguised. Edward coughed a laugh. I may need clarification on that one. Maya smiled. Well, keep a list, but this isn't just about vegetables. It's about boundaries. She looked at Edward. For all of us? He nodded. Serious now. Understood. Over the next hour, the boys scribbled rules with crayons. Always knock. No yelling. Near bedtime. Hugs must be asked for. Pancakes on Sundays. And one story each before lights out. Maya wrote down her own. Listen first. Apologize when you're wrong. No cameras. No exceptions. Edward added a line in. Neat handwriting. Make space for forgiveness even when it's hard. When they were done, Maya taped the paper to the refrigerator with two smiling magnets shaped like suns. There, she said, the new rules of the house. Later, while the boys played outside, Edward found Maya in the library sorting through children's books. They've changed since you were gone, he said. She glanced up. Or maybe they were always capable of it, and no one gave them the space. I've changed, too, he said, more hesitant. She didn't look away. I believe that. He stepped closer. What you did, staying, leaving, coming back. That's more than I deserved. Maya stood, placing the last book on the shelf. Maybe, but it's what they deserved. And I wasn't going to let your mistake be their lesson. He flinched a little but nodded. I want to be better. Then start by being present. Really present. Not just when it's easy. He looked down, ashamed. Do you think they'll ever forgive me? Maya softened. They already have. Kids are better at that than adults, but you have to earn it every day. That evening, Edward tucked the boys into bed for the first time since their mother died. He read from a storybook badly. Maya stood by the door listening as the boys giggled at his mispronunciations, corrected him, and then asked for just one more page. After lights out, Edward walked me into the front hallway. I was thinking, he said, about what you said, about not being staff, about being more. She crossed her arms gently. You're not going to offer me a promotion, are you? He smiled faintly. Number I was going to offer you a voice. She tilted her head. I want you to help me build something. Not just for them. For other kids like them. Kids who've lost. Something, someone. Maya's eyes widened. You mean a foundation? He nodded. Something real. You guide it. I'll fund it. She stared at him for a long moment, then said, if we do this, it's on our terms. No media circus. No performative charity. Agreed. She extended her hand. Then we have a deal, Mr. Hawthorne. He shook it. Call me Edward. She smiled. All right, Edward. That night, as she walked to the guest room, her own space, no longer just a temporary bed, she paused outside the boys' room. From within, a whisper. She came back, Eli said. I told you, Ethan replied. And Maya, leaning gently against the doorframe, whispered back to herself. I did. 3 weeks after Mia's return, the house no longer echoed with silence, but hummed with life. Breakfasts were louder, bath times messier, and the boys, once withdrawn and brittle, had begun to bloom like wildflowers freed from winter. The rules on the refrigerator were slightly worn at the edges from eager fingers pointing at them daily. And Edward, ever the stoic patriarch, found himself folding tiny socks and learning how to braid hair badly. But not everything changed at the same pace. Late one Friday night, well after the boys had fallen asleep and the staff had gone to bed, Maya wandered the halls. She often did this when the weight of memory pressed too hard against her chest. The quiet helped her think, helped her breathe. But this night, something was off. The library door was slightly ajar. Light spilled through the crack in a thin line. She pushed it open gently. Edward was there, seated at the desk, shoulders slumped forward, his phone in one hand, a half-empty glass of scotch in the other. He didn't notice her at first. "Bad news?" she asked softly. He flinched slightly, then glanced up. "Maya, sorry I didn't hear you. You're 3 in from the bourbon. I figured something was wrong." He set the glass down, cleared his throat, just reading an email. She waited. Finally, he turned the screen so she could see. The subject line read, "Custody hearing. Notice of motion." Maya blinked. "Custody. Hearing for the boys." He nodded, jaw tight. "Rebecca's parents, the Hollingsworths, they filed for temporary guardianship, claiming I'm unfit." "On what grounds?" He scoffed. "Bitter, neglect, emotional instability, domestic incident." Maya's face darkened. "They found out about what happened about me. Apparently," he muttered, "they've been watching, waiting. Now that the boys are starting to open up, now that we finally got some stability, they want to rip it away." She sat down across from him. "Have they ever been involved in the boys' lives?" "Not since the funeral," he said. "They blame me for Rebecca's depression. They said I buried her too quickly, that I kept the boys from grieving properly. Maybe they weren't entirely wrong." Maya was quiet for a long moment. "Do you want me to testify about the changes I've seen? What I've documented?" Edward hesitated. "I don't know if that helps or makes things worse. They'll argue your presence proves I can't parent alone." "Then maybe we don't fight them alone," she said firmly. "Maybe we show them what family really looks like, what healing actually requires." His eyes met hers. "You do that. Stand up in court after everything." "I do it for them," Maya said. "Not for you, not for appearances. For Ethan and Eli." He exhaled the tension, in his frame releasing slightly. "You really believe I can win?" She stood, walked to the window, and looked out into the dark where the boys' nightlight still glowed in the distance. "You won't win if you go in there as the man who slapped me. But you will if you go as the man who apologized, who changed, who showed up." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll show up." The next morning, the house buzzed with quiet urgency. Maya spent time reviewing journal entries, documenting the twins' routines, emotional progress, and interactions with their father. She gathered art projects, took photos of the refrigerator rules, and printed a photo Ethan had drawn, the 4 of them beneath a rainbow, holding hands. No one told him to. He'd just drawn what felt true. Meanwhile, Edward called his lawyer and scheduled an emergency meeting. For once, his instructions weren't about reputation management or asset protection. They were about protecting 2 boys who had already lost too much. At lunch, Maya sat with the twins under the oak tree in the backyard, cutting their grilled cheese into triangles and listening as they argued about which superhero would win, in Erase Flash or Sonic. "Do we have to go live with Grandma and Grandpa Hollingsworth?" Eli asked suddenly, his low voice barely above a whisper. Mia stilled. "Why would you ask that?" "I heard Daddy on the phone. Ethan said they don't like him." Mia set her plate aside. "Boys, no one is taking you anywhere without a fight. And I'm not going anywhere either. But they're rich," Ethan said. "And they're, white." Maya blinked, surprised. "What does that have to do with anything?" Ethan shrugged. "They said on the phone that Daddy's made bad choices, that your fam not part of the family." Maya leaned in close, cupping Eli's chin gently. "Let me tell you something. Families aren't built from the same skin or last names. They're built from who stays, who fights for you when it gets hard. And I'm here. That makes me family." Eli wrapped his arms around her, small and warm. "Then, you better win," he mumbled. Maya looked up at the house where Edward stood behind the window, watching them. He gave a faint nod. They were ready to fight. That night, Mia sat at her desk in the guest room, typing up her statement for court. It wasn't grand or formal. It was honest. She described the boys' anxieties when she first arrived. The screaming fits, the hollow silences, the way they reach for her hand, then let go, afraid of hope, and how over time they started laughing again, sleeping again, trusting again. At the bottom of the page, she wrote, "Healing doesn't happen in clean lines. It's messy, but in that house, I've seen two little boys begin to stitch themselves back together, not because of money, not because of blood, but because someone chose to stay." She printed it, placed it in a folder, and left it on Edward's desk. As she turned to leave, she glanced back at the note he'd once kept her handwriting, still taped to the edge of a photo frame. "If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the ones who will." She smiled, because now, finally, no one was pushing away, and everyone was staying. The courthouse smelled of polished marble and nerves. Its grand columns loomed like silent judges, the morning sun pouring through tall windows and golden shafts. Maya sat beside Edward in the waiting area, both dressed in muted tones, him in a tailored gray suit, her in a soft navy, dressed with sleeves just long enough to cover the faint scar still healing on her wrist from a night the twins had. Both had nightmares. Edward glanced sideways at her, nervous. Maya kept her gaze forward. "Only about what I can't control." Across the room sat the Hollingsworth James and Eleanor draped in affluence like armor. Eleanor wore pearls, a neatly pressed cream skirt, suit, and the kind of disapproving stare that could curdle milk. James looked less composed, his hand twitching against his cane, eyes darting toward Edward with barely concealed contempt. They hadn't acknowledged Maya, not once. The door to courtroom 5 opened, and a bailiff called them in. Maya stood, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to herself, "This is for Ethan and Eli." Inside, the courtroom was colder than the hallway. A judge sat perched behind a tall bench. An older woman with silver hair swept into a tight bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain. Her nameplate read, "Honorable Judith M. Templeton Edwards." Lawyer Mr. Fields stood first, calm, experienced, with just enough humanity in his tone to not sound rehearsed. He spoke of the sudden loss of Rebecca Hawthorne, of the family's struggle to rebuild in the wake of tragedy, and of Edward's recent efforts to stabilize the home, highlighting consistent therapy for the children, progress at school, and most notably, the presence of one, Maya Williams. Then Eleanor took the stand. Her voice, though polished, trembled with indignation. "We only want what's best for our grandchildren. What kind of example is a man who hires an unqualified stranger to raise his children? A man who by his own admission struck this woman in his own home?" Maya didn't flinch, though her cheek burned at the memory. "And she isn't even family," Eleanor added, her voice tightening. Judge Templeton raised an eyebrow. "Miss Williams isn't on trial, Mrs. Hollingsworth. But her presence is the issue," Elena insisted. "Edward can't care for the boys without outsourcing their emotional needs to someone else. Someone temporary, unrelated, improperly trained. She has no degrees, no license." The judge turned to Maya. "Miss Williams, do you wish to respond?" Mia stood and approached the bench. She didn't carry notes. She didn't need them. "I don't have a degree in child psychology," she said, "but I have lived through more pain than I'd wish on anyone, and I know what it looks like when children stop believing they're safe." She paused, letting her voice steady. "When I arrived, Ethan and Eli didn't speak to anyone but each other. They didn't sleep. They didn't trust. Not their father, not the staff, not even themselves. But little by little, they let me in. And not because I'm special, but because I stayed. Because I didn't run when it got hard. Because I looked them in the eye and said, 'You matter.'" She met Eleanor's gaze, then James's. "You say I'm unqualified. But what qualifies someone to love children who aren't theirs? To choose them every day without obligation? Because that's what I've done. Not for a paycheck, not for praise, but because someone needed to. Judge Templeton sat back, her expression unreadable. Thank you, Miss Williams. Maya returned to her seat. Edward reached under the table and gently squeezed her hand. Later, Judge Templeton addressed the courtroom. This court does not take custody challenges lightly, especially when initiated by extended family against a surviving parent. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, it's clear that while Mr. Contran's Hawthorne has made mistakes, he has also taken meaningful, consistent steps toward healing his family. The boys are thriving under his care, in large part due to the support of Miss Williams. She glanced toward the Hollingsworths. This court sees no grounds to remove custody from Mr. Hawthorne, petitioned Danette. A sharp gasp escaped Eleanor, followed by a rustle as she stood to protest. But James placed a hand on her wrist. "Let it go," he whispered. Maya sat still. Her heart thundered, but her face remained composed. Outside in the cool autumn air, Edward turned to her. "You saved them again." She shook her head. "Number you did. You stood up. You stayed in the room. The boys waited at home, unaware of the verdict, curled up on the couch with Harold reading them a comic book aloud in his deep baritone. When Edward and Maya walked through the door, Eli was the first to spot them. "Did we win?" he asked. Maya knelt down. "We did." Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist. "Does that mean you're not leaving?" Mia kissed the top of his head. "I'm exactly where I belong." That night, as they tucked the boys in, Edward stood in the doorway, watching Ma hum them to sleep. When she stepped into the hallway, he said quietly, "I've never been good at saying thank you." "Then don't," she replied. "Just keep showing up." He nodded, eyes softer than she'd seen before. "Tomorrow," he said, "we begin building that foundation. I already have architects scheduled." She smiled. "And the name?" He paused. "The Hawthorne Williams Center for Healing." Amaya blinked, caught off guard. "That's a lot." "It's true," he said. "You built it with us." She looked past him to the room where the boys now slept without fear. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The first board meeting of the Hawthorne Williams Center for Healing was held not in a glass-wall high-rise or a formal ballroom, but in the sunroom of the Hawthorne estate. The furniture was mismatched, the coffee slightly burnt, and one of the twins had left a crayon drawing taped to the window a lopsided tree with words above it in a child's hand. "Home." Maya sat at the head of the table, fingers laced around a ceramic mug, her expression steady but alert. Edward was to her left in jeans and a button-up, sleeves rolled. He didn't try to dominate the room. He simply listened, taking notes in a leather-bound pad, occasionally tapping a pencil in thought. Across from them sat three prospective partners: Dr. Angela Monroe, a retired child therapist; Joseph Kim, an outreach coordinator from a local foster program; and Lionel Pierce, a tech investor and one of Edward's oldest, if not most skeptical friends. "So let me get this straight," Lionel said, pushing up his wire-frame glasses. "You want to build a space for children who've been through trauma, but it's not a clinic, not a shelter, not a school, and not adoption focus. Maid not correct. It's a third place, a sanctuary, a bridge between where they are and where they want to be." Angela leaned forward, intrigued. "Who staffs it?" "People like me," Maya said. "Not just credentialed experts. Survivors, mentors, adults who've lived a fire and can teach others how to walk through it." Joseph scribbled something in his notebook. "And how do you plan to handle funding, oversight, liability?" Edward cut in gently. "We'll handle the logistics. Maya will lead the heart." Lionel blinked. "And the name stays?" Maya smiled. "Yes, it stays." By the end of the hour, Angela had agreed to join as clinical advisor, Joseph offered his connections with local agencies, and Lionel, after a long sigh and one muttered, "This is either brilliant or doomed," agreed to fund the first 6 months of programming. When the others left, Maya stayed behind to clean up. Edward stood at the doorway, watching her. "You handled that like a seasoned executive," he said. "I taught middle schoolers for 3 years," she replied, smirking. "Boardrooms don't scare me." He stepped into the room. "You were amazing." She didn't answer right. Away. She was staring at the drawing on the window. "You know," she said softly, "when I was growing up, I moved 12 times, 12 different homes. Never felt like any of them were mine." Edward followed her gaze. "That's why this matters so much." She nodded. Kids need roots and wings. Later that day, the twins helped Maya unpack boxes of art supplies for the Sense temporary setup in the East Wing. Ethan carefully stacked jars of paint, while Eli sorted brushes by size. "Do we get to come here, too?" Eli asked. "This is your home," Maya said. "So, yes, you get to help make it better for others." Ethan looked up. "Can we teach them our rules?" Maya knelt beside him. "I think that's a great idea." They spent the afternoon creating a new version of the house rules this time, illustrated in color, with Ethan drawing smiling suns and Eli adding stick figure families. Meanwhile, in the main house, Edward made a difficult phone call. He had spoken to his lawyer that morning. There was no legal requirement to include Maya in any parental decision-making. She had no official custody, no paperwork. But as he looked through the window at the way she knelt beside his children, he realized something deeper than legality. She was already family. He picked up the phone. "Judge Templeton, please tell her. It's Edward Hawthorne." 2 weeks later, Maya received a large envelope in the mail. It came with a handwritten note. From Edward. "No more temporary, no more blurred lines. You deserve the title. You've already earned." Inside was a formal appointment document naming her as co-director of the foundation and legal guardian in the event of his absence. Attached was a notarized petition, Edward requesting shared guardianship of the twins with Maya as co-signer. Maya read it 3 times before her hands began to shake. She hadn't asked for it. She hadn't even imagined it. But somehow it was exactly what she'd always wanted without knowing. That night, she sat with Edward on the back porch, the boys asleep. Upstairs, a fire crackling gently in the outdoor hearth. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "But I needed to." She turned to him. "Why now?" "Because they deserve permanence," he said. "And so do you." She blinked away sudden tears. "I'm not perfect." "Neither am I," he said. "But they don't need perfect. They need present. And you've never left." She reached for his hand. He didn't flinch this time. He held it overhead. A soft wind stirred the trees. And for the first time in a very long time, Maya Williams felt something deep and sacred settle inside her. Something she once thought she'd never feel again. Home. Maya didn't expect to see her mother again. She certainly didn't expect her to show up at the front gate of the Hawthorne estate on a Monday afternoon, wearing a weathered denim jacket and eyes that still carried too many unsaid things. Edward had been the one to answer the call from the intercom. "There's a woman here. Says she's your mother, Lorraine Williams." Maya froze. She was in the middle of sorting educational materials for the Sense upcoming open house posters, name tags, laminated behavior charts, and suddenly her hands felt too heavy to move. "She's here," Maya asked, her voice barely audible. Edward nodded slowly. "I can send her away." Maya stared at the stack of flashcards in her hands. Trust, forgive, safe. Words she'd been teaching the twins for weeks. "No," she said. "Let her in." Lorraine stood just inside the doorway, like someone waiting to be judged. Her hands twisted the strap of her handbag, and her gaze darted around the foyer as if unsure what kind of daughter built a life like this. Maya met her eyes with a mix of weariness and steel. "Hey, Mama, I wasn't sure you'd remember." Lorraine said, her voice grawly from cigarettes and time. Mia folded her arms. It's not something you forget. They sat in the sunroom, Maya, on one end of the couch, Lorraine on the other with a gulf of years and pain between them. I heard your name, Lorraine began. Some woman at church said you were in the news. Something about a center. Your face was in the paper. Mia didn't answer. I was proud. Lorraine added softly. But I knew you wouldn't want to hear that. Mia tilted her head. Why now? Why after all these years? Lorraine's eyes watered, and for a moment Maya saw a crack in the mask. Because I'm sick and because I was wrong. That caught Maya off guard. I didn't know how to be a mother. Lorraine whispered. I was drowning in my own pain. Your father? Well, he broke more than just furniture. And when he left, I didn't know how to hold anything together, not even you. Maya swallowed hard. I waited for years for you to come find me. I know. Lorraine wiped at her face. I failed you. Silence stretched between them. Then Maya asked, do you want to meet the boys? Lorraine looked up sharply. You have children? Not mine by blood, Maya said, but they're mine in every way that counts. Lorraine hesitated. Would they? Would they like me? Mia looked out the window where Ethan and Eli were chasing each other with paper airplanes, their laughter rising like music. They don't know. You, she said, but I'll tell them the truth that you're trying. Later that evening, Maya sat at the edge of the boys' bed as they peppered her with questions. She's your mom? Ethan asked incredulous. Why haven't we met her before? Eli chimed in. Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Mia said gently. Big ones, ones that take a long time to fix. Is she going to stay here? Ethan asked, clutching his stuffed tiger. Not right now, Mia said, but she wants to get to know you, slowly. If you're okay with that. Eli looked thoughtful. Only if she plays Uno. With us. Maya laughed. I'll let her know. Downstairs, Edward waited in the kitchen. How'd it go? They're curious. Maya said, more open than I expected. He poured her a cup of tea. Are you okay? Maya took the cup and held it close. I'm not sure, but I think I want to try for closure, maybe even healing. Edward nodded. You're braver than most. She looked at him. You make it easier. Over the next few days, Lorraine visited the estate inn. Short, measured doses. She sat with the twins under the big oak tree while they explained the house rules and showed her the feelings chart Maya had created. At first, she seemed stiff, uncertain. But slowly, she started to soften. She brought stories from Maya's childhood, the good ones, the ones that Maya had almost forgotten. She brought cookies that crumbled too much, but tasted like Sunday mornings. And she brought photos faded, worn, but filled with moments Maya had missed or buried. One evening, Maya sat with Lorraine in the library, flipping through one of the old albums. You used to hum that same lullaby you sing to the boys, Lorraine said. You were 3. Wouldn't sleep without it. Maya blinked, caught off guard by the memory. I thought I made that tune up. You didn't. You remembered it, even when you forgot me. Silence fell. Then Lorraine reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. Inside was a bracelet tarnished, simple, with a charm in the shape of a bird. I bought this the day you were born, she said, but I never gave it to you. Maya held it gently, fingers brushing the charm. Why a bird? Because I knew you'd fly someday. I just didn't know how far. Maya didn't cry. Not then, but later, in the quiet of her room, with the bracelet on her wrist and the moonlight casting soft shadows across the floor, she let the tears come. Because healing wasn't a destination. It was 1,000 small decisions to open the door again, to try, to forgive not just others, but yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Fall arrived in subtle whispers, the golden light lingering, longer in the mornings, the chill that kissed your skin just before sunset at the Hawthorne Williams Center. Preparations for the inaugural Healing Weekend retreat were in full swing. Maya stood at the whiteboard in the newly renovated community room, mapping out the weekend schedule with color-coded markers while the boys folded blankets. Nearby, Edward passed by with a clipboard and a grin. You do realize none of these kids will follow a color-coded schedule, right? Maya shot him a playful glare. They won't know it's color-coded, but I will. Keeps me sane. He laughed, and for a moment, everything felt light, easy. But Maya had learned that with healing came friction. Growth scraped up against the walls of old wounds, and that friction was coming. Fast. It started with a phone call from Joseph Kim, their liaison with the local foster agency. Maya, we have a complication, he said. What kind of complication? There's a girl, 16 names, Belle. She's been placed in 5 homes in the past year. Every one of them ended badly. She's smart, scary smart, but guarded. She's refusing therapy, won't go to group sessions, and now she's refusing to stay in the system altogether. Maya listened quietly. Joseph continued, her social worker. Thinks your center might be her last shot before she ends up in juvenile detention. But she's volatile. I won't lie to you. This isn't a sunshine story. Maya took a deep breath. Bring her in. Belle arrived with a single duffel bag, combat boots, and a wall of silence. Her hair was dyed a defiant shade of cobalt blue, and her arms were folded tight across her chest like a shield. She didn't speak during orientation, didn't look anyone in the eye, and made it very clear verbally that she didn't need saving from anyone. Eli, who'd been cautiously observing from the doorway, whispered to Ethan, she looks like she could beat up Spider-Man. Maya took a different approach. That evening, while the other teens played board games and swapped school stories, Mia found her in the corner of the art room, sketching furiously into a notebook. Mind if I sit? Belle shrugged without looking up. Free country. Mia sat quietly. What are you drawing, people? Mia tilted her head. Anyone I'd know? No one you'd understand. There was no bitterness in her tone, just distance. Mia nodded. Fair enough. They sat in silence for several minutes. Mia didn't push. Instead, she pulled a notepad from her own bag and started sketching beside her. Her lines weren't as sharp, her shading clumsy, but the act of drawing, the act of sitting with Belle as an equal spoke louder than any counseling session. Eventually, Belle asked, why are you even doing this? This or the center? All of it. Maya paused. Because I used to be the kid no one knew what to do with, and someone chose to see me anyway. Belle glanced at her for the first time. Just a flicker. But enough, you get one shot, Belle said quietly. I know. Over the next few days, Belle didn't transform into a model resident, but she stopped cursing during mealtime. She joined in a group hike, though she walked at the back. And on the 3rd night, she laughed an accidental burst of joy during a card game with Ethan and Edward. Maya noticed everything, but Edward noticed something else, too. You see the way she watches you, he said one evening as they folded linens in the storage room. She's suspicious, Maya replied. She's attached, Edward said already, and that's dangerous. Maya set down the towel in her hands. You think I'm making the same mistake I made with the twins. I think you need to protect your own heart, he said softly. She nodded. That's not what this job is about. I know, Edward said, but if you give too much and she leaves. She won't leave. He looked at her. They always leave, Maya. You said that once, remember? She stared at him, the words weighing heavier than she expected. Then maybe this time we don't let her. The retreat continued. Teens painted murals, cooked group dinners, and shared their stories in fragments. Maya gave them space, never forcing, always inviting. By the last evening, the group gathered under lantern lights, strung across the garden. Belle stood in the shadows at first, arms crossed, head low. But when Maya spoke, telling her own story of sleeping in strangers' homes, of being told she was too much or too angry to be loved, Belle stepped closer. You talk too much, she muttered under her breath. Maya smiled. So I've been told. Then Belle said quietly, I used to draw birds before. When things were better. Mia turned toward her. You still can. That night after lights out, Belle knocked on Mia's door. I don't want to go back, she said, her voice cracking. To the group home or anywhere else. This place, it doesn't feel fake. Maya stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. Then stay. Let's find a way to make this home. Belle nodded, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her hoodie. As she turned to leave, Maya whispered, You're not too much. You're just right and we see you. That was all Belle needed. Sometimes healing didn't come in thunderclaps or epiphees. Sometimes it came in quiet promises whispered through open doors. It started with a headline, just a blip in the corner of a local online paper, but enough to send a shiver down Mia's spine. Local Millionaire's foster program under scrutiny, allegations of improper staffing, oversight loopholes. The article was thin on details, but thick with implication. Anonymous sources, concerns raised, children at risk. It painted the Hawthorne Williams Center as a well-intentioned, poorly managed operation, suggesting that Maya was unlicensed and unqualified, and hinting that Edward uses wealth to bypass regulations. Edward was furious. Maya was silent. She read the article again and again, her fingers gripping the tablet, so hard the screen dimmed from pressure. This is a smear job, Edward growled. Someone's trying to sink us. Someone who knows we're making progress, Maya said quietly. The next day, Joseph called. Maya, I'm getting calls from the agency. They're asking if you're operating with certified trauma counselors, if your background checks are current. This isn't just gossip. It's turning into a formal investigation. Maya closed her eyes. How? Bad? Bad enough. They're talking about pulling kids out of the center. Even Belle. That hit harder than she expected. No, she said firmly. They can't take her. She's only just beginning to trust. Joseph sighed. You need to fight this, Maya. But quietly. Don't make it worse by going public. Just shore up your defenses fast. She hung up and went straight to Edward. They're coming for us, she said. And if we don't get ahead of it, they'll take the kids, the funding, everything. Edward leaned forward. We'll bring in outside consultants, auditors. I'll get Monroe to review every policy. But Maya, this is a hit job. It's personnel. Someone who knows us, Maya said, knows the structure, the timeline. Edward's jaw clenched. You think it's the Hollingsworths? No. Maya said they wouldn't play it quiet like this. This feels closer. Later that night, as rain lashed against the windows, Maya sat in the Sense office, going through personnel files, trying to find a weak link, a mistake, something they missed. Then she saw it. Belle's intake form. One signature was slightly off. The social worker listed wasn't the one Joseph had assigned. The paper had been scanned through an older printer from an agency they hadn't worked with in over a year. Maya's heart dropped. Someone had forged the paperwork. She dialed Joseph. Immediately, this is going to sound crazy, but I think someone tampered with Belle's file. Joseph pulled up the records on his end. Wait, yeah, this isn't our file. Where did this come from? I don't know, Maya said, her voice tight, but someone planted it. Joseph was silent for a moment. Then you need to get ahead of this now. The next morning, Mia called an emergency board meeting. Angela, Lionel, Joseph, and Edward sat at the long table, tension thick in the air. She laid the forged document on the table. This is the weapon they're using against us, she said, and we need to disarm it. Angela frowned. This is serious. If an audit reveals a forged placement, they'll shut us down on grounds of negligence, even if we didn't know. Joseph leaned back, frustrated. Someone slipped this in. They're targeting Belle because she's the easiest to discredit. If they can claim we failed her, they can unravel the entire center Edward stood. Then we don't give them the chance. We go to the press first. Tell the story ourselves. Lionel, raise an eyebrow. You want to publicize a forgery? That's risky. Maya shook her head. Not just the forgery, the truth. We tell them who Belle is, why she came here, what she's become. Angela looked at her. You'd be putting her at the center of a media storm. I'll ask her first, Mia said. She gets to choose. That evening, Maya found Belle in the art room, painting a massive canvas, a bird breaking free of tangled ropes. Can I talk to you? Mia asked. Belle kept painting. They're trying to send me back, aren't they? Yes. Belle didn't stop. You going? To let them? Mia stepped closer. Not without a fight, but we need your help. She explained the situation carefully. Honestly, I won't put you in the spotlight unless you say yes. She finished. Belle set down her brush. You told me once I wasn't too much. That I was just right. Maya nodded. Then let's show them who I am. Belle said, let them see me. The next day, Maya stood in front of a group of reporters. Edward beside her, Joseph and Angela behind, and Belle Brave centered stood in front of the microphones. My name is Belle Harris. I'm 16. I've lived in 10 foster homes in 4 years. I've been called unfixable, volatile, dangerous. But here, someone saw me. Someone stayed, and I started to believe I might matter. Again, her voice didn't waver. I'm not a case number. I'm not a mistake. I'm a girl who paints birds because I forgot how to fly, and now I'm learning again. Maya stood tall, proud. The cameras flashed. The questions came, but the tide had shifted. Truth, once buried, had a way of rising, and this time it came with wings. The fallout wasn't as explosive as Maya feared, but it was relentless. For 3 straight days, the media camped outside the estate's gates. Some reporters shouted questions. Others just stood there, cameras pointed, hoping to catch an image of the girl who'd cracked open the story no one wanted to tell. Bryle didn't flinch. If anything, she grew stronger. The center released her artwork as part of their statement, a gallery of resilience. Her bird painting was shared across social media, a symbol of second chances. Her voice in the press conference echoed far beyond the local community, reaching state-level organizations. Emails poured in survivors, supporters, skeptics, and believers. But not everyone was kind. An anonymous blogger posted Belle's juvenile record. Another called Maya a well-meaning fraud. A national columnist wrote, "Charity cannot replace training," questioning Edward's decision to entrust children's futures to empathy without structure. Maya absorbed it all in silence until one morning a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single line: "You saved my daughter when I couldn't. Thank you." It was unsigned, but it was enough. At breakfast, the boys were giggling over their cereal, arguing whether orange juice belonged in pancakes. Maya poured her coffee, smiled, and thought, this is worth it, even the fire. Across the table, Edward folded the newspaper and met her eyes. You're holding up. I have to, she said. Not just for them. He added, for you. She hesitated, then nodded. For me, too. That day they held a staff meeting. Every counselor, mentor, volunteer. Maya stood at the front of the room, holding the weight of the past few weeks in her chest. I won't pretend this hasn't shaken us, she said, but I won't apologize for our mission. We didn't build this center to look good. We built it because kids fall through cracks, and we decided to stand in those cracks and catch them. The room was quiet. Then Angela stood. We're with you, one by one. The team nodded, some murmuring, always. Yes, we stay. That night, Maya walked the halls of the center alone. The walls were lined with drawings, quotes from the kids, a few photographs of family dinners. She stopped in front of one. Ethan and Eli arms around Belle, all 3 laughing, Home captured in a frame. In the East Wing, she found Belle working late on a new mural. A city skyline with windows glowing gold. "You're still here," Maya said gently. Belle shrugged, wiping her hands on a rag. "Can't sleep. You okay?" Belle paused. "Yeah, just thinking about what happens next. People think because I stood in front of cameras. I'm fine now, but I still get mad for no reason. I still don't trust people easy. I still—" She trailed off. Maya sat beside her. "You don't have to be finished to be free." They sat in silence. The only sound, the faint hum of distant crickets. Then Belle said, "You think I could ever, I don't know, speak at schools, talk to other kids like me?" Maya smiled. "You just did, and yes, you're more than capable." Belle grinned, a flash of pride beneath her guarded expression. "Then I want to be the person I needed back then." The next morning, a call came from a representative of the state's Child Welfare Committee. "We've been reviewing the Hawthorne-Williams model." The voice said, "It's unconventional, but it's working. We'd like to meet, possibly replicate it elsewhere." Maya sat frozen. "You're saying you want to expand?" "We're saying," the voice replied, "we want to learn." After she hung up, she stared out the window for a long moment, her thoughts spinning. It was bigger than her now. Later that week, Maya, Edward, and Belle sat with the boys under the oak tree. The air smelled like cinnamon and dry leaves. Ethan was reading aloud from a children's book, pausing every few sentences to let Eli make up alternate endings. Belle listened with a quiet smile. "I want to write a book someday," Eli said suddenly, "about kids who fight bad guys." Maya ruffled his hair. "Start with the truth. That's always the best story." Edward leaned back against the trunk, his hand brushing lightly against Ma's. She didn't move away. The sun dipped lower, casting golden lines through branches. They were all different, broken, reassembled, stitched together, with shared pain and rebuilt hope. But they were whole, not because they'd erased the cracks, but because they'd filled them with gold. Kanugi, Maya had read about it once. The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer, celebrating the history, not hiding it. That's what they were doing. And maybe, just maybe, that's what healing was. A choice every day to stay. Maya didn't recognize the man at first. He was tall, gaunt, dressed in a cheap tan blazer, and stood by the community center's front desk like he didn't know whether he belonged or wanted to leave. His face was partially obscured by a baseball cap, but something about his posture, nervous yet familiar, stirred. Something buried deep in her chest. Angela was the one who waved Maya over. "He says he's here to speak with you." Didn't give a name. Maya approached cautiously. "Can I help you?" The man looked up, and just like that, 20 years. Collapsed. "Maya," he said, voice weathered, uncertain. "It's me, your father." Time stopped. She heard at first in her ears a rush of blood, a thrum of disbelief, and then in her chest a cold stillness. "You don't get to say my name," she said, voice low. I know," he replied quickly, taking off his cap. His hair was gray. Now his eyes bloodshot. "I shouldn't be here. I saw the press conference. I saw you and Maya, I had to come." She stood frozen. People moved behind her. Kids laughed in the playroom. A counselor called out directions for a trust-building activity. The world kept spinning, but inside her, something cracked. Edward arrived just then, sensing something wrong. His gaze shifted between them. "This man bothering you?" he asked. Maya didn't look away from her father. "Number?" "Yes." "I don't know." "I'll give you space," Edward said quietly, but he didn't go far. "I'm not here to ruin anything," her father said. "I don't want money. I don't want anything. I just want to see if you were okay." Maya let out a slow breath, sharp and steady. "You left when I was 10, when Mom had her. Breakdown when everything fell apart. I was sick." "Maya," he whispered, addicted, lost. "I didn't know how to stay." "That's not an excuse," she said. "It's a fact." But it doesn't erase what happened or what didn't happen. He nodded, shame curling around his shoulders. I missed your life. You forfeited it, she corrected. They stood in silence. Then he pulled something from his coat pocket, a photo, bent at the corners, faded with time. A girl in overalls with braids and scraped knees, holding a sketchbook and squinting into the sun. You left this on the porch the day I drove away, he said. I kept it. It was the only piece I had. Mia's throat tightened. That photo had been from a summer day she barely remembered, taken by a neighbor. She'd forgotten it existed, but seeing it now felt like being punched in the memory. I'm trying to be clean, he said. Been sober too. Years, working at a garage outside Baton Rouge. I see a counselor. I go to meetings. Maya crossed her arms. And what you want forgiveness? He looked at her, eyes glassy. Number I want grace. The word hit differently. Grace wasn't a transaction. It wasn't earned or negotiated. It was a gift offered freely or not at. Oh, I can't promise that, she said. He nodded. I understand. But I can. Promise not to hate you anymore, she added. That's something. A slow tear slid down his cheek. That's everything. Maya didn't tell the boys that night. She didn't tell Belle or Edward or even Lorraine. She needed time to file it away like a fragile document you're not ready to read but can't throw away. Instead, she cooked dinner, helped Eli with math homework, read Ethan 2 chapters of their favorite mystery novel. Then, when the house was quiet, she sat in the sunroom with Edward. He came, she said. Edward looked up. Your father? She nodded. It was like talking to a ghost I've been angry at for so long. I forgot I was still haunted. Do you want him in your life? I don't know, she said honestly. But I wanted him to see me, that's all. Edward reached across and took her hand. You're seen, he said simply. She rested her head against his shoulder, and for the first time that day, the tremble in her heart began to still. 2 days later, Belle came bursting into the office holding a flyer. Look, she beamed, my first speaking invite. A youth panel in Atlanta. They want me to talk about trust and art. Maya grinned. That's amazing. When is it? Next month. But I'll need a chaperone. Mia raised an eyebrow. You're asking me? Belle smirked. I trust you not to let me eat 3 gas station burritos in a row. Flawed logic, Maya said, but flattering. Then Belle got serious. I'm nervous. That's good, Mia said. It means you care. Belle looked at her with that guarded hope Maya knew so well. Thanks for seeing me even when I couldn't see myself. Maya touched her shoulder. That's what light does. It finds the cracks and gets in any way. And in that moment, Maya understood something new. Healing didn't always mean forgetting. It meant integrating the brokenness into something fuller, stronger, realer. It meant letting go of what you couldn't change and holding fiercely to what you could. It meant becoming the kind of person who could forgive, not to excuse a past, but to free the future. And it meant finally standing tall in your own name. Maya Williams, mother, mentor, healer, and no longer haunted. 6 months had passed since the blur of the hearing. The estate's gardens were heavy, with late spring blooms, and the center buzzed with its new program calendar. It wasn't perfect, but it was thriving. Mia, the Cent's youngest counselor, had started weekly sessions with Belle. Ethan had moved up a grade and was acing spelling. Eli had decided he was going to invent his own superhero team, complete with capes, and Maya watched him grow like a gardener who had learned to root in hope. That morning dawned bright and clear. Edward had invited the board and staff for a small celebration under the oak tree. A banner made by the twins read, 1 year of staying. Maya arrived early to fluff blankets and arrange lemonade glasses. She hesitated by the banner, remembering the first shaky version. Now it looked familiar, like belonging. All the guests gathered. Angela, Joseph, Lionel, Lorraine, and staff from local agencies filled chairs, scattered around the lawn. Children sat in a circle, twirling paper lanterns. Edward began. When we named the center, we married two impossible odds, wealth and empathy. But the real miracle isn't the programs or the funding. It's endurance. It's the choice someone makes every day when no one's watching. Lorraine stood then, unexpected but certain. My daughter taught me more than I ever gave her a chance to learn. I'm honored to be here, not as a bystander, but as someone who's still growing. Ethan and Eli marched forward, each holding a gold-painted rock. They placed them at Ma's feet. Ethan said loudly, "This rock is gold because it's brave." Eli added, quietly, "This one is gold because it stays." Mia swallowed, tears swollen behind her throat. Edward stood beside her, hand in hand, as the twins presented their gifts. Joseph cleared his throat next and said, "We've reviewed our 6-month outcomes. Schools report increased attendance, fewer behavioral referrals, and most importantly, kids who trust again." Angela stepped forward. "We're expanding 2 more sites, with Maya at the helm." Lionel raised his glass. "Here's to the woman who didn't ask to be part of family. She built one anyway." Maya blinked and gripped Edward's hand. He squeezed hers in return. As the crowd began to mingle, Belle approached Maya with her sketchbook in hand. Inside was a new drawing for golden trees, each different, each leaning in toward the center like they held up something greater together. Beneath her, handwriting, "This is what growing looks like." Maya kissed her cheek and whispered, "Yes, baby, exactly." Late afternoon sun cast long shadows as the crowd thinned out. The twins ran off to play tag. Lorraine lingered beside Maya under the oak. "I'm proud," Lorraine said softly, glancing at the stone towers the twins had built. Maya nodded. "Proud is different than forgiven, but you're here." Lorraine reached for her hand. "And I want to keep showing up." Maya, she leaned in and rested her head on Lorraine's shoulder. Edward found them and draped his arm around both women. "Let's plant something together. New. Flower bed, maybe roses." Maya's lips curved. "Only if we promise to tend to it every week." He laughed. "Deal." That evening, Europa, Edward's butler, brought them all lemonade refills. The laughter of children drifted across the lawn. The faint scent of jasmine settled as dusk folded over the estate. Later, when the headlights had cleared the driveway and the center was quiet again, Edward found Maya in the sunroom, sketching new rules with Ethan labeled community rules now. Trust, kindness, bravery, presence. He closed the door. "I wanted to ask, would you marry me?" She looked up stunned, not because of what it was, but because he said it now softly in a way that wasn't a proposal. It was a promise. She didn't answer at first. She closed her sketchbook and pressed it to her chest. Then she said, "Yes, but only if you know I'm not perfect." He brushed her hair out of her face. "Neither am I, but we're better at growing together." And outside, the wind rustled to the oak tree as if congratulating them with ancient approval, because healing had become inheritance. Family built not by blood, but by 1,000 every day. Actions wrapped in gold. And in that moment, Maya Williams felt rooted and flying all at once. Spring had fully arrived. By the time the Hawthorne Williams Center opened its second location in Bridgeport, the unveiling ceremony was quiet, purposeful. Children from the center in Greenwich stood beside Maya and Edward, holding signs. They'd painted, "Hope grows here. Second chances live." 2 neighbors lined the sidewalk. Cameras flashed gently and bees hummed among newly planted daisies and recycled tins. Maya stood before the small crowd, sunlight catching the gold flecks in her hair. She could feel centuries of expectations. The expectation that she would fail. The expectation that her past might define her future. But here she was, surrounded by people who had witnessed her fight for belonging and won. Edward stood beside her, his arm around her waist. He gave a nod when she began. We launched this center because we believed in the power of staying. But today, we're here to say that healing deserves wings, too. Not just permanence, but possibility. Children outside cheered and waved. Media crews filmed from the street, but Edward kept his gaze on the families waiting behind them. People who showed up because they wanted to see something real. Later, after greeting dignitaries and fielding questions from curious press, Mia wandered behind a building where volunteers were hanging fresh banners and organizing craft stations. Lorraine approached with a tray of lemon squares and bottled water. She handed Mia one and smiled without intrusion. "They're good," Mia said through a mouthful. Lorraine laughed softly. "Leeson, like this place?" Mia paused, then asked, "Do you want to walk the gardens?" They strolled down a path lined with budding roses and tiny saplings. Lorraine paused before a sapling planted in honor of Ethan and Eli. Its leaves fluttered in a breeze that smelled like pollen and possibility. "I planted this," Maya said, "so someone who feels alone knows they can root even through hard soil." Lorraine placed her hand on the tiny branch. "You have deep roots." That afternoon, inside the community room, staff were gathering for the first training session at the new site. Angela stood at the front, welcoming them with warmth. Belle sat nearby, sketching program plans, while Joseph organized supplies. Locals filled tables, curious and hopeful. Edward slipped in quietly and whispered to Maya, "You've changed thousands of lives." She smiled at him. "We're just getting started." Later, Maya and Belle walked through the unfinished wing where future therapy rooms arched beneath skylights. Belle paused at a window overlooking the road. "There's so many roads out there," she said softly. "I used to think none of them led home." Maya followed her gaze. "Home is more than walls. It's what people build together." Belle nodded. "Then I'm building it." That evening, Edward hosted a modest dinner for the central team, including children, under strings of twinkling lights in the main courtyard. Plates of roasted vegetables, herb-roasted chicken, rice, pilaf, and a big bowl of sliced strawberries filled the table. Ethan offered a polite thank you before passing the bread basket. Eli showed a volunteer how to fold napkins into airplane shapes. Belle carried a sketch pad, but joined in storytelling at the end, making everyone laugh with a dramatic retelling of a school science. "Fail." Edward raised his glass of lemonade, to staying, to building, to making roots deeper than fear. Maya lifted her glass into wings wide enough to let others fly. They clinked, glasses sealed by effort, empathy, and mutual trust. When most guests filtered away, Edward took Mia's hand and led her outside to the garden beds. Fireflies were just beginning to rise. He knelt, dug a fingertip into the soil, and picked a thin root of a rose. He planted it alongside the sapling already there, 2 stems intertwined at the base. "This is our promise," he said, softly. Maya knelt beside him to keep tending. He nodded. "Every week, even when it's hard," Maya smiled, tears glossy in her eyes. "Every week, Ethan." And Eli came out with flashlight. They followed quietly, stood beside them, shining the light on the new route. "Mom," Ethan whispered, "that's so cool." Edward looked at them, then at Maya. "Thank you," he said, not loudly, but clearly. That night, back in the guest room, Mia paused at the doorframe outside the twins' bedroom. She watched as Edward tucked Eli in. She saw him gently smooth Ethan's hair before turning off the light. She stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall. Edward appeared beside her. "You staying?" She looked into the darkened doorway. "I'm always staying." He nodded. She leaned her head on his shoulder. Light filtered through the tinted glass, the faint glow from a lamp in the nursery, the last whispers of dusk through curtains. Outside the new rose root rested in the soil, and above it the sapling waited, rooted, growing. Together, it began with a letter typed anonymous postmark from a small town in upstate London. It arrived in a plain white envelope addressed to Edward Hawthorne in black ink, No return. Address. No signature. Just 5 chilling words printed neatly across the center of the page. She's not who you think. Edward read it twice before folding it neatly and slipping it into his jacket pocket. He said nothing to Mia that night or the next, but something in his demeanor shifted just enough that Maya, with her own sense of tension, felt the ripple beneath the calm. It wasn't the first time shadows had followed them, but this felt deliberate, more targeted. The next morning, while Maya supervised the younger kids in the art room, Edward sat, alone in his office, staring at his laptop screen. A name echoed in his mind. Terrence Maroro, a former business partner. The kind of man who had always envied Edward's success and more dangerously resented his turn toward charity. He'd sent veiled threats before, mostly empty. But this had venom. Edward opened a secure browser and began digging. Within minutes, he'd found a blog post on an obscure forum. It wasn't explicitly about Maya, but it danced close. Words like fabricated backstory and sympathy branding caught his eye. He clicked out of the site, but the damage was done. He looked out the window. Maya was walking through the garden with Belle, her hand lightly on the young woman's shoulder. They laughed about something. Unaware, he clenched his fist. That night over dinner, he asked, "Did you ever go by another name?" Maya blinked. "What?" "Before Maya Williams. Legally or otherwise." She set her fork down. "Why? Are you asking me that?" He hesitated. "I got a letter. It suggested you might not be fully forthcoming." Maya stood up slowly. "Do you believe it?" Edward looked up. His face held conflict, not certainty. "I believe you. I do. But I had to ask." Her voice was quiet but steady. "I was Maya Simmons until I turned 18. Then I took my grandmother's surname, Williams, because my mother was gone and my father didn't earn the right to name me." Edward nodded, shame crawling up his spine. "I'm sorry. I'm not ashamed of who I was," Maya continued, "but I am angry that someone thinks they can weaponize my past." Later, she found Bella in the old art room. She handed her a copy of the letter. Bella read it. "Someone scared." "Of what?" Maya asked. "Of what we built." The next day, a news story aired, local, short, a talking head speculating about background checks and donor scrutiny. They flashed Mia's face on the screen. Words like mysterious rise and guardian of troubled youth. Maya turned off the television. She didn't flinch, but she didn't sleep that night either. Edward reached for her hand in bed. "I'll call the lawyers. We'll handle it." She nodded. "We always knew this could happen, but it's not fair number, but it's familiar." 3 days later, Maya stood before the full staff. Cameras had been barred. This was family. "I won't spend energy justifying my worth," she said, "but I will protect this space. If they come for me, let them, but they don't get to tear down what we built." Angela stood. "Let us handle the press. You handle the mission." Joseph raised his hand. "We'll double security." Belle walked up and handed Maya a photo. A drawing, really. It showed Maya holding a lantern in a dark hallway with small hands reaching for her from the shadows. "Keep walking," Belle said. "We're right behind you." That night, Mia walked the halls of the original center alone. She stopped at each door, remembering the children, the crises, the triumphs, her own fears. She reached the front steps just as Edward pulled up in his car. He stepped out, held up a folder. "Background checks, old records, everything you've ever submitted. It's clean." "H!" She raised an eyebrow. "You doubted that?" He shook his head. "I just needed to prove to the world what I already knew." She stepped toward him. "And what do you know, Edward Hawthorne? That your past makes you powerful, not dangerous." They stood on the porch, together, silent. The wind stirred the banner hanging by the entrance. It read, "Hope lives here." Maya looked at it, then at Edward. "Let's remind them why." Inside, the sense lights glowed into the evening like a beacon, unshaken, unapologetic, and in that moment Maya understood Storms don't always come to destroy. Sometimes they clear the air for something even stronger. Winter's first snow fell softly over the Hawthorne estate, frosting the branches and muting the world. The blanket of white transformed familiar paths into fresh canvases. Maya watched from her upstairs window, a steaming mug in hand, listening to the hush. She drew comfort in the silence. Tonight, the recent smear campaign had quieted official investigations, found no wrongdoing. Donors reaffirmed. Commitments and local media coverage turned from suspicion to admiration. Yet, something unresolved glimmered. Beneath the festive lights already strung around the oak tree, cold air carried the memory of threats. Maya wondered whether peace was earned or merely granted this season. She descended the stairs and found Edward in the living room unpacking holiday cards. On the mantel were framed photographs, migraine-wasted laughter, art wall, explosions, children in capes. Each one reminded him why they'd endured storms. He looked up, thought you might help seal envelopes. Maya smiled and settled next to him. He handed her a card from Ethan and Eli, stick-figure parents. 3 trees label hope, 2 sons, and 2 smiling scribbles. We love you. Maya felt something burst behind her chest, less fragile this time. Something resolute. She drew a deep breath. Edward reached across the coffee table and brushed her hand. How are you? Really? Maya stared at the card. She felt the edges of doubt flutter, but the past had taught her this. Honoring scars made them sacred, not weak. I've been thinking, she said quietly, about the letter, about the storms? Edward nodded gently. Maya continued, I might not want to erase the record. I want to mark it. He glanced at her, curious. Let's create a space in the center, she said. A gallery dedicated not just to happy stories, but to the shadows, to wounds, to survival, where people can submit something. They're proud they overcame. Edward raised an eyebrow like a hall of resilience. Maya's eyes lit. Yes, not hidden, but honored. He nodded. I can fund that. We can design it together. Over the next week, Maya worked with Belle and community volunteers to gather pieces, drawings, written notes, artworks brought by teens who had once stood where Belle had stood. One painting depicted a mass figure with cracks of gold leaking from within. Another was a poem typed on crumpled paper. I learned to stand again after I thought standing was a sin. On opening day, they cleared a wing in the Greenwich Center. Volunteers hung the displays between warm string lights. Soft instrumental music played. Naomi, one of the teens formerly in foster care, shared her essay. My left arm is my story. Families, staff, champions, and local press arrived. The room glowed with hushed reverence. Edward stepped forward to speak. He said, this space is our declaration that trauma will not silence people. It will testify that wounds, when spoken, become pathways, not prisons. Someone asked the twins to speak. They looked at each other uncertainly. Eli stepped forward. We drew these stones, he said, holding a small container. Ethan added, they were gold inside but cracked, so we painted them gold again. Maya nodded, voice thick. That's what Kanugi does. It celebrates the cracks. It reminds us that broken isn't less. It's art. Applause rippled through the room. Afterwards, Maya found Belle. She looked small but braver than ever. I want to add something of mine. Belle whispered. A journal from right after I came. Maya hugged her. Thank you. Nearby, Lorraine and Edward stood, holding hands. Mia slipped into between them. Lorraine brushed a snowflake from Mia's hair. This is beautiful. Mia smiled. Because it holds a truth, Edward added. And because you're not afraid of truth. That evening, around the dinner table, the family laughed. Over board games and burnt gingerbread, Edward chased Eli around the oak tree with a flashlight. Ethan read aloud from an old mystery novel. Brigadier Joliffe having coffee with Miss Marple. Maya watched them. The boy who once cried at Midnight. The boy who refused to eat peas and felt the weight of the seasons behind him. She'd walked through storms, question her belonging, face accusations. But this was a place she'd built with her broken hands and heart. Not perfect, but real. After the boys were asleep, Edward found Maya once more by the fire. He slid an envelope across the coffee table. Inside was a small slip of paper. Invitation. Speaker. At the state's trauma-informed youth conference. Belle Harris. Maya's eyes flicked to the empty chair beside her. She knew who it implied. Edward offered gently, "Would you share the stage with her?" She paused, thought of storms and light coming and staying. She turned to him and nodded. "Of course." He smiled, relief coiling like warmth through his chest. They leaned into each other. Outside the window, snow drifted. Steadily, soft persistence. Inside, the fire crackled, and Maya felt it in her bones. Healing was not forgetting the storms. It was starting again in gold. Spring, unfurled across Connecticut, like a promise on the edge of bloom. At the state's trauma-informed youth conference. In Hartford, a large hall buzzed with anticipation. Government officials, social workers, counselors, teachers, and youth from across the state gathered to hear stories not only of trauma, but of transformation. Maya and Belle sat, side by side on a low wooden stage in front of folding chairs and bright lights. Behind them, a giant screen displayed a golden bird breaking free from shadowed bars a mural Belle had painted months earlier. When they took their seats, the audience leaned forward. Edward and Ethan sat in the front row. Ethan clutching his new sketchbook, page open to a drawing of 4 figures holding hands beneath a sunrise. The moderator introduced them. Maya Williams, co-founder of the Hawthorne Williams Center, and Belle Harris, formerly in foster care. Their story is one of resilience, loyalty, and the power of being seen. They began by recounting the early days Belle's entry into the center, her distrust, her refusal of therapy. Mia, seated off to the side, looked on with moist eyes. A few other teens nodded in recognition. Then Belle took over. Her voice trembled at first. "I used to think my voice was the thunder before the storm. Dangerous. Always too loud or too angry. And then one day they didn't run. They didn't call me volatile. They just listened." Maya added, "Healing doesn't happen on stage or in press releases. It happens in the silent moments when someone stays despite the storm." They spoke for 20 minutes. Questions followed. How do we train people who've lived through trauma? How do we balance structure with empathy? What accountability keeps our mission honest? Maya answered, "We value emotional credibility over credentials sometimes, not because diplomas don't matter, but because truth sometimes begins with the scars people choose not to hide." She ended, "Our model is not a program. It's a responsibility. To show up even when they don't expect it, to stay even when it's inconvenient, and to help young people rewrite their stories, not erase them." The room fell silent. Then applause began softly but steadily until hands clapped through the ceiling beams. Backstage, Edward hugged Belle, then turned to Maya. "You led that. I just followed." She shook her head. "You built the space. That's why we could lead." Later, at a reception, Belle spoke with students answering questions about art and healing. Maya watched from across the room with pride and calm. She thought of the first time they met. Uncertain, guarded, angry, and how much she'd grown because of that. Edward approached with a glass of iced tea. "You taught someone to fly tonight." Maya smirked. "She taught herself. I just gave her room." He smiled and squeezed her hand. As the crowd began to thin, a woman from the audience approached them. Dr. Iris Patel, a professor at Cambridge School of Social Work. "Your story is remarkable. We'd like to partner to bring your Hall of Resilience to our campus, to train our students." Joseph and Angela joined her. They exchanged excited nods. This was an expansion on paper. It was amplification of their values. Their small center now resonated beyond its physical walls. On the drive back in Edward's car, twilight colored the highway rose. Ethan dozed in the back seat. He'd fallen asleep as soon as they left the hall. Eli lay next to him, sketchbook open on the seat between them, half-finished drawing still glimmering. Edward glanced at Maya. Change the world. She leaned her head against the seat. If enough small voices join. Yeah. Edward rested his hand gently on hers. When they arrived home, Europa greeted them at the door. The house glowed softly under early evening lights. Snow had melted around. Footpaths replaced with fresh crocuses peeking through damp soil. Upstairs, the twins slept in their room, cuddled under quilts Belle had helped make. Mia paused. In the doorway, the frame contained their nighttime routine in soft whispers and tucked-in dreams. She slipped inside, quietly, placing her hand gently on Ethan's head. At the same time, Edward straightened Eli's blanket and kissed his forehead. They both pulled back and met across the hallway. "We did this," Edward whispered. "We keep doing it," Maya replied. Outside, early morning birds settled into branches at the garden's edge. Inside, Healing carried on a conversation that never ends, momentum fed by collective bravery. They closed the door softly, and for the first time in years, Maya Williams slept, not because she knew she'd rest, but because she finally felt she belonged. Summer had come full circle, and with it the Hawthorne Williams estate shimmered. Beneath a golden afternoon sun, the gardens hummed with bees. The oak trees' leaves whispered above in gentle arcs. Today marked the second anniversary of Maya's first day, but it felt more like home than remembrance. Inside the sunroom, children placed framed art upon a long wooden bench. Drawings, poems, clay figures, each tagged with a name and the date it had been healed. Beneath them lay the golden rocks Ethan and Eli had painted long ago. A new addition sat front and center. Belle's canvas of a bird breaking through ropes into flight titled our story in song. Maya guided a group of teens through the display. When they reached their pieces, each shared a short reflection. One young girl recited a poem about being lost in darkness until someone simply sat beside her. A boy shared a drawing of broken wings and the words, "But I learned to float." Edward watched from the window, hands folded across his chest. Lorraine stood beside him, also observing, both taking in what had become more than a center, a mosaic of survival. Maya slipped outside and found them under the oak tree. The twins chased paper airplanes above their heads. Edward offered her a seat on the bench. "Look at this," he said, gesturing toward the art display. She followed his gaze and felt a knot of gratitude tighten in her chest. "This is we built," she said softly. "A sanctuary of truth," Lorraine added. Maya reached for Lorraine's hand and gave it a light squeeze. Under the banner that read, "Healing lives through holding," a small crowd gathered. Angela approached, clipboard in hand. "We've confirmed the new site will open in Hartford this fall, and Cambridge has approved the Hall of Resilience curriculum for student training." Maya blinked. "You're serious?" Angela beamed. "We're already scheduling, and schools across the state want to replicate your model." Edward stepped forward, "Which means we need more mentoring staff. Would you be interested in leading that, Maya?" She exhaled and let her eyes rest on the twins, spinning closer toward her. "I'd love to," she said, "but only if we keep our values intact. No shortcuts, no compromises." He nodded. "Exactly. Ethan." And Eli paused and ran back. Ethan climbed onto Mia's lap and clung tight. Eli pressed his head into her side. Lorraine watched them and smiled through tears. "You changed everything." Mia covered Ethan's small head with a hand. "They changed me." Edward watched in silence. The late afternoon light softened. A car pulled up at the drive. Teresa, a former foster youth and now intern at the center, hopped out and dashed over. She carried 2 bicycles tied with ribbons. "Gifts," she declared, "for you and Ethan, from the teens." Ethan hopped off Mia's lap, eyes wide. Edward and Teresa wrestled with the bikes while Eli cheered. When they were ready, Ethan took the smaller pink bike. Maya, the yellow one. She lifted him onto his seat, adjusted the helmet with careful tenderness, then swung herself onto her bike. They pedaled slowly through the estate's paths. Edward held Eli's hand. The leaves overhead filtered late-day sun until light danced through them like confetti. Lorraine trailed behind with Belle and Teresa. It felt grand, ordinary, sacred. At the garden's edge, they stopped to admire the rose root and sapling nestled side by side. They'd grown stronger. Thickened bark new, branches, buds ready to bloom again. The twins climbed off and raced ahead to chase butterflies. Edward and Maya shared a look. "You think the storms are over?" he asked. She let the moment linger. "I don't know, but we've built something storms can't wash away." He kissed her softly. "Then whatever comes, we're ready." They help with dinner later. Grilled fish, vegetables. From the garden, fresh bread still warm. The table was full. Staff, children, families, volunteers. The conversation gathered around new plans, summer specials, student workshops, holiday, outreach programs. Lorraine lifted her glass to staying to building roots and setting wings. They clinked glasses. When the party quieted at twilight, the twins tugged Edward and Maya upstairs too. Showed them their new fort blankets thrown over chairs, fairy lights inside, books stacked on the floor. They sleep out. Here sometimes, Ethan explained. Maya sat down and watched them, two boys who once were hollow with loss, now rich with laughter. Edward whispered, "Thank you." She leaned into him. "Thank yourself." Outside the window, fireflies had begun to drift in patterns that looked accidental and beautiful. Inside, the fort glowed with warm lamplight. Maya closed her eyes, breathing in the sound of peace. This was the end of one chapter, the beginning of everything else. Because healing isn't final. It's persistent, imperfect, and bright. And the light it remains. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next.